I'm Lizzie Maddox, and I like to get into the nitty-gritty of homeschooling because I believe that the details can make the difference between a good and a bad day. Today I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of our history studies so far this year. I'll be giving you a mid-year update, covering some of the resources that we've enjoyed the most this year, and also why it has been such an emotional year for me when it comes to history. I've had a lot of emotion over it, which surprises me. But I'll share some of that emotional journey with you. If you stick till the end, I also have a free resource for you, and I'll tell you about that closer to the end of the video. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some of the resources that we've been using. We're studying early American history from Native Americans to 1800, and so far we have reached the time just before the beginning of the American Revolution. So that's what we've studied so far. So as far as resources, the main resource I want to talk about is Minecraft Homeschool. That's something that my fourth grader has spent a lot of time on this first part of the year. He really loves Minecraft. All of my kids do. And he's been begging me to incorporate it more into homeschool, and we have a little bit, but I thought since this is a year that we want to do more things that we really enjoy, I thought this would be a good time to do that. I got a subscription to Minecraft Homeschool. I'll put a link to it down below, and it's really a nice resource, I think. They cover a lot of different subjects, some guided lessons, some guided studies, some, like what my son did, were work at your own pace, self-paced. And we just looked at the history portion of it. Let's see, what was it called? Mind Through Time U.S. History. And it's set up like in different unit studies, so like Native Americans, explorers, colonial life. And each unit has about 6 or so lessons. There's a written portion with a video and maybe a quiz, and then an assignment, which is a Minecraft build in order to process what they've learned. And so in general, that's a really cool thing. I like the whole idea of it. Some of the lessons were really very appropriate for Minecraft, I thought, like building an Iroquois longhouse, or the Niña de Pinta de Santa Maria. And we had some good conversations about it. And it was a lot of fun for him, which is what I wanted. I was treating it as a supplemental, not as our main history, which it could have been. But we're doing history together as a group, so this was just a supplemental for my oldest son. I had some issues. In general, I really liked it, but I had a couple of problems with it. One of them is that I wasn't able to do a lot of advanced planning. And you know me, I like to do my planning. I don't like to be surprised with stuff. And part of the reason I like to plan is so that when something unexpected happens, I can assess the impact of it to the rest of our life, and maybe be able to react to that interruption gracefully rather than getting super stressed out. And so since I plan for interruptions, that's not the problem. It's that I knew it was going to be an interruption every week. See, the lessons are set up so that you don't know what the assignment's going to be until you've completed like the written portion of the video. So maybe there's a way for a parent to go in and see what the future assignments are. I didn't know of a way to do that. And so Fridays when he would do it, he would do the written part and then come to me and tell me, well, here's what the assignment is. And the reason why that was a problem was because he usually needed a reference picture to do the build. And he needed me to help him find these reference pictures. So I don't let my kids Google. There's ways to keep kids somewhat safe online, and I've implemented some of that, but it's not even that. It's that, you Google something, you Google Iroquois longhouse, you're gonna get a lot of results. And so I didn't want to burden my 9-year-old with having to do this assignment and then also having to filter through all these results. That's just, I thought, making things unnecessarily difficult for him. And so he needed my help to do that. I was really wishing we had some kind of set of children's encyclopedias or something. I have found that that's a hole in our homeschool, that we don't have more just reference materials like that, and I'm trying to rectify that slowly. But whatever. At the time, he needed me to Google things to find a reference picture for him. And that's if, that didn't take long if it was something very straightforward like build a longhouse. But some of the assignments didn't really lend themselves well, I felt, to Minecraft, and that was my other problem with it. For example, create a museum of objects representing this explorer's life, or some way to represent important moments of this explorer's life. And that's a lot. I had trouble thinking of ways. My son and I was going to talk about it. It just kind of got stressful because I had trouble thinking of things, and then to think of something that he could build, and then to find that reference picture for him, he was getting stressed out. And he's good at Minecraft. I mean, I would consider him to be an expert for a 9-year-old. He's played it for many years. He's read a lot of books about it, seen a lot of videos. He's very knowledgeable when it comes to Minecraft, and he had trouble with it, with some of the builds. So it kind of just got stressful, that knowing that every week I was going to be interrupted with this assignment and trying to help him do the assignment, and not knowing if it was going to be a quick thing or a long thing. It was pretty stressful, and it kind of got to be not fun anymore, and it was supposed to be fun. This was a fun thing for us. It probably would have been different if he were older, or if this were really truly his only history that he was doing. He could have done the lesson on Mondays, maybe spent part of the week planning a build, and then doing the build on Friday. If I'd gone about it like that, it wouldn't have been such a burden, but that's not what we're doing. And so after he did a few units, I decided to just kind of pull back on that. So he finished a unit in December, and I haven't introduced a new one, and he hasn't said anything. So we're just taking a break from that for now. We may use Minecraft Homeschool for other things. But as far as history, I think we're just going to give that a rest for now. We did use a lot of other fun history resources. The way I planned for this was basically a series of unit studies. I used the What Your Child Should Know series to look up what historical summaries they had on aspects of American history. Put those in a spreadsheet because I got a love affair with spreadsheets, love them. And then I had columns in the spreadsheet for different types of learning, like watching something or reading something, or read aloud, or reader, other activity, miscellaneous activities like little toys, the tubes that you can get with different things, and activity books, just miscellaneous fun things they could do. And so I've been filling in this spreadsheet so that when we get to a unit, I can look to see what's in there and think, okay, which one of these things are we going to do? And that's worked out well for me. I kind of did that with science in the past, and for me, it's a good way of doing unit studies. So some of the fun resources we use, some were better than others. I have my little list, let me look it up. I've been using kind of a literature-based approach to history this year. So some of the best books that we've read have been a couple of picture books. One of the picture books that really kind of shook me up was called Encounter by Jane Yolen. It was presenting the arrival of Columbus to the Caribbean from the point of view of a Taino boy. And so it's very different than what you might normally read about Columbus. And that's why I wanted to read it with my kids. Well, for that reason, but also because I'm from Puerto Rico and I most likely have Taino blood in me. And we recently did our DNA, and so I know I've got Native American. It's probably Taino. So it was also very personal to me. I don't agree with every aspect of the book. I think where it has most of its value is in showing that a different point of view, not from the point of view of the colonizers, but from the point of view of the native peoples. And I think that's valuable for us to have those discussions. So that was really an interesting book and really kind of shook me up. William's House by Ginger Howard, that was really good. I think especially for boys. It's a really cool book that shows how the environment that you live in affects how the architecture of your house and how the colonists had to change the architecture they were used to in order to fit their new surroundings. Books like the Voyage of the Mayflower graphic history book, that whole graphic history series my oldest has been loving. They're not picture books, they're a graphic novel, so they're for older kids. And they're just really fun. They're a quick read, just, one day. And every time my son reads one, he says he loves it so much. And it gives real history, real information in a kind of a story form, kind of like comic book form. So he really loves those. Another fun book he read was The Dreadful Smelly Colonies, The Disgusting Details About Life in Colonial Americas by Elizabeth Realm. And you can just tell from the title, that's not going to be your typical book about history. And so my son enjoyed that. He's also been reading, and this is my oldest, I'm talking about my 4th grader. He's also been reading some Clyde Robert Beulah books, like A Lion to Guard Us. And what was the other one? Squanto, Friend of the Pilgrims, and there may have been another one. I really like the Clyde Robert Beulah books because they are appropriate for children, but they have meat to them. They don't dumb things down. They just make real events, difficult circumstances, deep emotions accessible to children, and really give you something to think about. We've usually do picture books for read alouds these days, but we are in the middle of The Sign of the Beaver by Elizabeth George Spear, which is more of a novel. It's not a picture book, so my kids just sit and listen while they're hopefully doing some quiet activity, which isn't always an easy thing to find. So it's about a young boy, a 12-year-old who needs to stay behind in a new cabin that him and his father have built while his father goes and gets the rest of the family to come back to live with them now that they've settled some new land. And so the plan is for him to be left alone for a couple of months while all that happens. And so that started a lot of conversations with my kids just about the difficult decisions parents had to make at that time and how much responsibility a young child, even 12-year-old, had. It didn't pretend like this 12-year-old thought like a man, though. You see that he's still a 12-year-old, and he was a little immature and made some poor choices and just some simple mistakes and was taken advantage of, even though he tried to do the right thing, and all those things led to some problems for him. But then when he really needed the help, it turned out that some Native Americans who lived nearby had kind of been watching him and stepped in to help him when he really needed it. And so we're in the part of the book now where he's developed an uneasy friendship with a boy from the tribe that's helping him. And it's been really interesting. My kids really like it. The biggest problem again is keeping them busy during the read alouds. For my youngest, my 4-year-old, sometimes the answer is for him to just go off and play in the playroom if he wants to, and that's fine. For my older 2, I do require to stay and listen. And so we're experimenting with some different ways that they can kind of be kept busy, their hands busy, so they can listen and not be bouncing around or bothering each other. And you know what? I'm the same way. Even when I watch TV, I need to be doing something with my hands. So I don't blame them. It's just something that we're going to have to deal with. All right, so now we're getting to the emotional part. Why history has been emotional for me this year. There's 2 main things that kind of created a lot of the emotion in me, and I'm not justifying my emotion. Maybe I've been overly emotional over it. I'm just sharing with you some of the feelings I've had and why. So one of the things that concern me about teaching history to my kids, American history specifically to my kids, is that I don't want to teach them. I feel that sometimes founding fathers and just historical figures that are important to the founding of a nation are presented in a way that makes them seem kind of deifies them, almost mythological, where it glosses over maybe negative aspects of those, like the founding fathers' history and all, in order to support this narrative of like these amazing men who and it's usually men, these amazing men who founded our nation, and they're just wonderful and perfect, and so history is kind of dumbed down, and I feel like even sometimes facts are altered in order, I think the effort is to be made age appropriate for children, but it just strays too far to the other. And you can be age appropriate and still tell the truth. And telling the truth to my kids is very important to me. I don't want to tell them all the ugly things. You need to be emotionally mature enough to handle difficult truths. So I don't want to just like throw all the ugly truth out to them when they can't really handle it. But I do want to tell them the truth as much as I can. So I was really concerned about that. For example, Benjamin Franklin, he's often portrayed as this kind of bumbling genius, uncle, harmless type person. And the truth is he was a dirty old man, and probably in the worst sense of those words. I don't need to tell my kids that, but I'm not going to I don't want them to have this cartoonish figure in their heads when it comes to someone like Benjamin Franklin. When we can accept that, we can say that he did things that were really important to our nation without pretending like he didn't have any issues. And so, I really struggled with that. I really had a lot of emotion over Pocahontas, surprisingly. I think we all know that the Disney version is not true, but when I started doing some of my own reading when we got to her, and I saw the huge discrepancy between what we were reading in books and kind of what I was reading online. And honestly, the version I was reading online kind of had the ring of truth to it. It made more sense to me. I'd always questioned. Well, not always, but I had often questioned kind of what I'd heard about Pocahontas. Something just seemed off about it to me. And it does make much more sense to me that this was a young woman who was kind of used and abused and manipulated, used to manipulate her father, who was very powerful. And, I found all that to be very upsetting. Very upsetting, because I thought, oh, this poor young woman, she died young, and then she doesn't even have the honor of having her story told truthfully, ages past. This kind of whitewashed version is given where, I don't know, it upset me a lot at the time when I read it. All the Christopher Columbus stuff really upset me. Again, since I'm from Puerto Rico, and here he's presented as, he's often presented as a hero that came in, especially by Christians. There's a lot made out of his name, Christopher Columbus, saying that means Christ bearer, and that this view is that he traveled across the oceans to spread Christ to the world, and which I just don't think is true. I think he was motivated by greed, and that when he did travel across the oceans, he did not spread Christ. He treated people badly, just horribly. And so I found that to be very emotional and upsetting, and it angered me a lot. And that brings me to the second thing that concerned me and kind of upset me about teaching American history to my kids, which is that as a Christian, I want to teach history from a Christian worldview. I do teach history from a Christian worldview. But some of the resources that are available to Christians present things in a way that I feel are unfair to us and not being truthful with us, and really like unfair to God, where they claim to know the mind of God and make statements such as there's this theory that God wanted the New World to be discovered at exactly the time that it was discovered by exactly Christopher Columbus. because he is God. It couldn't have happened any other way. If it happened any other way, then that would have been God's will. But since it didn't happen another way, then this was God's will. And then when you start with that premise, then things kind of start to snowball. So it starts making Christopher Columbus seem like he was just this really Christ-following guy, and if you believe that, but then you also know he did these terrible things, and somehow you have to gloss over that, and it continues like that, and that bothers me a lot. First of all, because you can't claim to know the mind of God in that way. I guess it depends on your view of free will, but I don't think it's necessarily true that that was the only time that God was willing for, that for Columbus to sail the ocean blue, that was the only time God was willing for anything like that to happen. I feel like God gives us more freedom than that, and freedom of exploration, and sometimes opportunities are missed simply because a person's will isn't in line with God's will. They're kind of doing their own thing. But really, whether or not that's true, that's not even the point. The point is that you can't know that for sure. So to claim that you do I feel like that's dangerous. And then to present a person who was so clearly flawed, like Christopher Columbus, and present him as almost this perfect man, and to say that almost like he was the ultimate Christian when he did such terrible things. Just the hypocrisy of that. And, it's confusing to me to see that happening. How much more confusing is it to a child? I think that's just kind of missing the greater message, and the greater truth, the honest truth. I feel like the important thing for my kids, that I want my kids to understand out of history, is the recognition that there are no perfect people, that people are complicated, that we all have some good and some bad in us, and we don't make all the right decisions all the time, that sometimes you can make some poor decisions and learn from them and do better, and other times you can end up making some really good decisions but still be living out something negatively in your life, something wrong in your life, some issue or problem. And I think when you see things that way, you realize that, like our founding fathers and even people like Christopher Columbus and all, they may have been God's instruments, but that doesn't make them like God. That's the really important thing to understand. And I think that's a message of both hope and caution to my children, that it's hope. It's a hopeful message because they can know that, you can do some wonderful things that impact many people. You can really impact the world in a positive way. There are things that you can do, just like these other people. They weren't any more special than you. Benjamin Franklin wasn't any more special than you. Neither was Christopher Columbus. They were just men. You can grow up to be a man that does impactful, positive things. But it's a cautionary message too, because when they look at the past and see that these men, they did wonderful things, but they also did some really negative things that affected people badly. For my kids, they can understand the thing I tell them all the time, which is your actions have consequences. And the consequences of your actions are not erased because you have a change of heart or because you do something, good. So that's what I want my kids to understand about history, that you don't have to be a perfect person to do great and powerful things, and also doing great and impactful things does not erase the consequences of our poor decisions. So that kind of sums up some of the emotion I've had over history. Now, I did promise you a resource that I have for you, a free resource that I have for you. That resource is a list of ways to keep kids busy during a read aloud. I shared with you, and if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I've struggled with keeping my kids attentive yet occupied while listening to her read aloud, so that it doesn't just devolve into this terrible mess and fights and he touched me and he's looking at me and that kind of thing, where they're attentive but still occupied. So I put together a list that I'm referring to, and you may need it as well. I don't know your life, so if your house is like mine, you might need it. I'll put a link down in the description box so you can know how to get to the freebie from on my website. So let me know what you think, and if any of those possibilities, if any of those things work out for you, or if you have your own tip for how to keep kids busy during the read aloud, I would love to hear it. I'll try anything. Okay, well, thank you for watching. I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.